Welcome to Denver Startup Week. I'm Eric Matisik, President and CEO of Highwing and co-founder of Denver Startup Week. I could not be more excited about this year's event, as entrepreneurship has always been the heartbeat of our city. For the community, by the community, for the future of the community is why this event has existed. And now more than ever, it's important to give back and to educate those entrepreneurs who are building the companies of our future. We're able to bring Denver Startup Week to this community thanks to our sponsors. Join me in thanking our title sponsors: Downtown Denver Partnership, JP Morgan Chase, Prologis, and Zero. Our track sponsors who've made all the great content you're hearing today possible: Battery 621 and Public Works, Capital One Cafe, Colorado Lending Source, Friday Health, Quizlet, Exactly, Zayo, and Zestful. Our headline event sponsors are bringing the excitement this week. Thank you to Wix, Kinzon, MAPR Agency, Obsidian HR, Kickstart Fund, Promontory Mortgage, Molson Coors, and Comcast. Finally, thank you to our partner and member sponsors listed on the screen. Please look out for these companies as you enjoy our virtual Denver Startup Week, and don't forget to use hashtag DEN Startup Week to share your experience and moments of inspiration on social media all week long.
Hi, my name is Matt. I'm the CEO of Zestful, and we're an employee reward and engagement platform for companies and teams. We make it really easy for companies to create fun goals for their teams to complete and share with each other. Things like learning something new, getting outside, or even sharing an awkward selfie. For every goal you complete and share, you earn points. Or pancakes, or lemons, or unicorns. You get to pick whatever the currency is, which makes it a lot of fun. And these points, or pancakes, can be used to redeem prizes like company swag, cash on your Zestful card, or even towards team prizes like virtual happy hours or trivia nights. We created Zestful so that we could stay connected and build a fundamentally better culture no matter where we are. And we hope it can be just as fun and rewarding for your teams.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to Denver Startup Week. My name is Olivia Omega. I am the founder track chair, as well as on the Denver Startup Week organizing committee. If 2020 has taught us anything, it's that we're more powerful when we come together as a community to share ideas and help make each other better. At Denver Startup Week, we strive to make all of our sessions a space where attendees can connect, learn, and grow, regardless of age, gender identity, gender expression, race, ability, sexual orientation, or the combination of those identities. So there's something here for everyone at Denver Startup Week. We are going to start and kick off our session that we have today. And I just wanted to say welcome again. And we have Liz and Julia, who are the session organizers, here live in the chat. So as we are going throughout the video and throughout the session, if you have questions, feel free to put those in to the chat or the Q&A box, and they can answer you all live. Once this video is over, we'll end the chat, and Julia and Liz will make sure to put some information in there as well so that you can follow up and continue the conversation. Thank you so much, and let's get started.
Hey everyone, good afternoon, and thank you for that warm introduction. My name is Liz Austin, and I am here with my colleague Julia Pratt. We're the communications team at Healthgrades, and we're really excited today to talk to you about purpose, pandemic, and protests, and how this all ties into building a powerful communication strategy in times of crisis. So I'm Liz Austin. I'm the communications director at Healthgrades, and I'm responsible for everything externally that we do with the company: media relations, social media, digital strategy, and kind of everything in between.
And I'm Julia Pratt, the Senior Communications Manager for Healthgrades. I am responsible for all things internal communications, employee engagement, and the like, as well as helping to facilitate some of our employee resource groups. So with that, we know that this is a recorded presentation. We are all over the Zoom chat feature, standing by to answer any questions that you have. We'll be providing links to some of the resources that we're going to be sharing. So please feel free to introduce yourselves, start a conversation in Zoom. Or if, Twitter or LinkedIn is more of your forte, reach out to us there.
So before we get started, I just want to read through a quick disclaimer. So the views and opinions expressed during this presentation for Denver Startup Week are those of the authors, myself and Julia, and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of Healthgrades. Talk about a timely thing to put into a presentation, especially given the content that we're about to talk about. So I want everyone to just take a minute, and we're just going to take a deep breath before we even get started. So on my count, we're all going to do big inhale and then let it all out. So on my count, inhale 1, 2, 3, 4, and exhale 1, 2, 3, 4. No one's had an easy year, especially communications and marketing executives. So I think this presentation, what we want to do is really walk through the good, the bad, and the ugly, and take a second to reset before we get back and get started. So to set everything up, the only thing worse than being talked about is not being talked about. I think before 2020 happened, people would look at this quote and, it's a typical, well, all PR is good PR, all press is good press. And that doesn't necessarily hold true anymore. So the only thing worse than being talked about is not being talked about. Think about it.
And, diving right into when coronavirus made landfall in the United States in the first quarter of the year, this was something, we don't have a playbook for pandemics, was something that one of our facilities employees had said to me as we were working through developing a go home plan, which we ended up sending our employees home on March 16th. But this really struck me because, throughout this presentation, you're going to see different examples of things that are already familiar to you, which should be refreshing, but also opportunities that you can take to really just kind of sit back for a second, try to reset and remember that you might have some things already in your, in your tool chest that you can use. And in this particular instance, what we had was, and, the communications folks on this call know well the phone book thick crisis communications plans that we've, developed ourselves or that we use as a Bible sometimes. But, at the very end of those, sometimes you would see a line item for pandemic. And, just kind of recalling that, what can we do? We were able to take that crisis communications 101 information that we already had and really stretch it so it applied to, the coronavirus in 2020 for our Healthgrades employees, as well as our consumers and clients.
So what did we see happen? We saw, on the onset of coronavirus, everyone's in crisis mode. Everyone's trying to figure out personally, professionally, what to do to stay safe and also keep their family safe. From a brand perspective, brands rushed to issue statements. A statement, everyone has probably received these emails or messages or on social media, saying something along the lines of, we're in it together and we're here to keep you safe. Here are just a few examples. JetBlue being a travel company, airplanes, they had a big responsibility from a branding perspective to say and show consumers, travelers, how they're going to keep their customers and crew members safe. Also with REI as well, a retail company, they had to find ways to keep their stores open. And as we know, when stores shut down, they had to also find ways to, keep orders going, keep their business afloat while people might not physically be shopping. These are kind of some of the statements that we saw come out and some of the things that we saw take place as soon as brands started to figure out kind of their voice and their narrative in the coronavirus pandemic.
Right. And to build on that narrative, then we saw brands take action. And, even in Colorado, we saw this with such a large ski industry. Here's an example from the Colorado Sun. There's a company called the Zay in Longmont. They typically make ski boots, but they pivoted and started to make face shields because not only was that what the need was for, since we all remember and still feel the shortage of PPE, but it helped to keep them afloat as well.
So we've talked a little bit about consumer brands, but what did healthcare brands do? Here at Healthgrades, we're in a unique position. We work with some of the nation's leading hospitals and health systems. And we, at Healthgrades, we saw how they had to respond. Their response is very different from a consumer brand, from the store down the street, from REI, from travel brands, right? Because they had two main priorities as soon as COVID-19 hit here in the US. Priority number one is that they had to care for their patients and their communities. Priority number two, keeping patients and communities safe and informed. When I outline these priorities, I mean more in a communications aspect. Of course, we know that our doctors and our hospitals were there to treat and keep us safe and our families safe through all of this. And we are so grateful and thankful for their work throughout this entire pandemic. But from a communications perspective, they had to find a way to consistently talk and share and push out messages that focused on these two priorities. However, as we all know, and March feels like a million years ago, the priorities have expanded. They've evolved and they've certainly changed as coronavirus has changed. Kind of, I feel like in the first few weeks it was hour to hour and then day to day. And now we're kind of on this weekly sprint of there's new information coming out, new, headlines, new things that we all have to kind of be aware and focus on. So specifically for healthcare, they had to find, so doctors and hospitals had to find new ways or utilize old technology, if you will, to provide care for patients not affected by COVID-19. Old technology, I mean, is, the rise of telehealth. The stronghold of digital communications with your doctor has really taken on a whole new definition throughout the pandemic. People still needed care. We saw headlines, that stroke rates were going down, that heart attack rates were going down, when we knew they were still happening. So hospitals, started out this whole transition of call first before you get into the hospital, before you go see your doctor, to let's connect online so we make sure that you're getting the care you need. Kind of back to that number one priority we talked about. Also, hospitals and doctors automatically have a level of trust with patients, with consumers. Hospitals and doctors had to find a way to combat and kind of maintain this level of trust with their communities throughout all of this, amidst a lot of misinformation, a lot of social media, a lot of people talking online and, going to Google to try and figure out what the best case scenario is. And they had to combat all of that as well. Interestingly enough, Healthgrades started the COVID-19 patient confidence study back in March. We saw a way that we could support not only our consumers by understanding where they were at, but also understand our doctors and hospitals and understand our clients. We've been tracking patient confidence since the beginning of the pandemic. And actually just a few weeks ago, we're seeing that patient confidence is at an all-time high. So 65% of respondents feel comfortable going to their doctor tomorrow, over the lowest point of 39% on April 30th, which many of you know was kind of the height of the shutdown here in the country. We've seen this number continue to rise, and I think that also really speaks to all of the work that healthcare brands have had to do to maintain that level of trust, maintain that level of care for their patients and consumers, and not to mention hospitals and doctors' offices are probably one of the cleanest places you'll go outside of your home right now. And then we come to this.
Just as we thought that we were getting a handle on coronavirus, on May 25th, George Floyd was murdered. And unfortunately, he wasn't the first, even just this year, and he hasn't been the last. But he was really the catalyst to, spark national protests and absolute outrage over police brutality and racial injustice. And those protests happened in the streets, as you see here in Minneapolis, but they also really happened online. And there was no separation of, professional space and personal space, because everyone is feeling the impacts of, this layered sadness, in addition to the losses from coronavirus, but now also, pause. What was unique to 2020 was that the protests were being held in the streets as well as online. And online, people were already home from coronavirus. So this really compounded the reactions and the flooding over between professional and personal spaces, because it was all in one. So internally, we certainly had to take that into account. But online and in Liz's space externally, it was astounding, the fast pace of it.
Right. And I think too, what we saw, and like Julia just mentioned, the protests, yes, they might have been physical protests, but they also took a whole new voice online. So this headline from the Washington Post: the George Floyd protest generated more media coverage than any protest in 50 years. I think that really shows the heightened awareness and the heightened movement here that was sparked by George Floyd's death, that people reacted, and people also have this online platform to react. It's a very different situation than what we even saw with the coronavirus. And I think people were really angry and upset and grieving in their own way that came to a very different picture online. So what did brands do? We know how we felt about it, but what did brands do? So brands issued a response. Throughout the coronavirus, we saw brands issuing statements. I like the differentiation here, because brands issued a response to a national movement. Ben and Jerry's, for example, quote unquote, just put all corporate statements to shame. Their statement, very true to the Ben and Jerry's brand. They've been activists, they've been protesters, they've been through it as Ben and Jerry up in Vermont. Their statement really put, kind of words, pens to paper on how a lot of people were feeling. And I think a lot of people online really resonated with that. But then you turn to something like this, to Amazon, one of the, biggest companies that we've seen and probably ever, just from size and revenue and sheer kind of grandness in this tech space, right? But they did what a lot of other brands did in responding. They put out a black square with this white text and kind of a little bit of a blanket statement. What do I mean by blanket statement? We'll see in a second. So after these responses went out, the internet reacted, people reacted. And it wasn't always positive. So in Fast Company, just a day or two after Amazon put out their blanket statement, if you will, is that why is Amazon support for the racial inequality protests ring so hollow? And it says right here, actions speak louder than words, right? We know how much Jeff Bezos is worth. And I think a lot of people are starting to see that action means a lot more than just putting out these statements. So it's also interesting to note here's this blanket statement that I just mentioned. These screenshots were taken on the same day, and even the difference in the retweets and the likes was twofold over the Amazon tweet that they published. We at Brand are committing to fighting injustice. And I'm sure we could all name, 1, 2, 3, or 4 different companies that we saw do something very similar to this. So what are we up against as communications professionals, as marketing professionals, as startup founders? First of all, more video content is uploaded in 30 days than the major US television networks have created in 30 years. Top that with, by 2023, the number of social network users in the US is expected to reach 257.4 million people, or users, rather. I know personally I'm on Instagram and Twitter and LinkedIn and all of these different platforms, but we're still all kind of absorbing all of this content at every turn. In March 2019, over 4.4 million blog posts were published every day. However, and I think this is my favorite statistic of all, the median average time spent reading an article is 37 seconds. So we're getting inundated with all of this content, with all of these tweets, with all of these blogs, with video, with, everything in between. And it's like, where do we even go from here?
Right. And that's when you really just take another breath, inhale, exhale, and try to remember these 5 pillars that Liz and I put together. They are really rules to live by. We're calling them the 5 pillars of a successful communication strategy. 1, remember your company's purpose. 2, know your audience and where to reach them. 3, know your leadership. Or if you are those leaders, know yourself and what you're capable of doing. 4, be transparent and show empathy. 5, put your purpose into practice.
Right. So number 1, first and foremost, most important, remember your company's purpose. So purpose is this idea around why are you doing something? Why do you exist? If you're a startup founder, this is a great moment to take a step back and really think about, why did you found your company? Why are you doing what you do? If you're a communications team like we are, whether at a big or a small company or everything in between, remember the companies that you're working for or that you represent and their purpose as well. So at Healthgrades, we're dedicated to empowering stronger and more meaningful connections between patients and their healthcare providers. So this mission statement, this purpose, helped us drive everything we did from an external communication standpoint, from a social media standpoint, and also from an internal standpoint to some extent, which leads into knowing your audience and where to reach them. So how do you use that purpose to really drive who you're talking to and how you're talking to them?
That's right. And, from our perspective, this has been a really unique year. As Liz walked through earlier, we know what hospitals and health systems who are Healthgrades clients have been going through this year. So ways to reach them and also be respectful of, just being absolutely swamped in such a critical, essential capacity was, key to our communication strategy. We also have our consumers that are scared. There's an overwhelming amount of facts or theories or, just kind of ideas floating around out there. And it was a job that we took very seriously to deliver, concrete information that they could really rely on so we can maintain, that trust with consumers.
Right. And I think, go ahead.
Yeah, I just to finish, then our employees, again, we had sent them home. We had also gone through an integration about a month before we sent everyone home. So there was a lot of changes internally as well. So, really with all of this in mind, trying to keep in mind the existing communications channels that we had that were tried and true, any ones that needed to be honed, that people already knew to look to or were already using. And in some instances, we did, create new ones to just rise to the evolving needs that 2020 presented.
Right. And what I was going to say is that we really took a deep look at our communications channels, internally, externally, what made the most sense, but also why are we talking to our audiences in such a, crisis driven time? Something that we did at Healthgrades is that we created this whole idea around our message of gratitude. It's something that our employees felt really strong about, and something that personally we could all get behind, but also made sense for our consumers and our hospital clients and our doctors. So we started on social media internally, kind of this idea of message of gratitude: stay home, stay healthy, thanking our frontline workers. And this all turned into this bigger video that we did around gratitude. So we invited employees to submit their message of thanks. We had numerous participation from across the company. And this was really our way to say thank you and show our support. I think a lot of companies tried to put a lot of words down, where we realized that this is our place. We are a healthcare company, and we needed to thank those and recognize those that were working around the clock and still are to keep our families safe. So with all of this being said, we know our purpose, we know who our audience is and how to reach them. What does it mean to know your leadership?
And leadership is really an extension of your purpose. Those are the people who are proving out, putting a face to your company. In our instance, we have a wonderful CEO who knew the importance of upping the frequency of all hands calls for our employees. It was pretty much every 6 weeks we were on the phone with, almost 900 employees. And even if the agenda was a little lighter, some sessions than others, we still saw over 90% of participation of people tuning in. And that really demonstrated how important it was for folks to stay connected, that they wanted that sense of, understanding from, the top leadership position. Actually, and we, being a healthcare company, we have a chief medical officer on staff, and he has been absolutely wonderful and very busy. 2020, we have put him up as really the host for a speaker series for these town halls that our clients can certainly tune in to. And he's been wonderful just to provide updates on coronavirus as it was constantly evolving, down to the hour by hour, like Liz mentioned. But we also really tapped him to provide updates at these all hands calls for our employees as well. And we had a Q&A similar to how we see here. He did the same for our employees, so that folks, again, across the board, we were using channels, we were using sources of our leadership team to provide facts, to maintain our trust, to build on it where we could. And so these are particular examples of what we had to work with at Healthgrades. For the founders who are on the call, it is the expectation now that people want to hear from leaders of the company. Pause. And that really moves into number 4. What you hear from a leader, from a company, it really benefits organizations or brands to be transparent and to show empathy. That has really worked for Healthgrades. And, as the internal communications manager, I can say that, any update that we have given, whether it is regarding the ongoing protests, whether it is, regarding coronavirus, there's always pretty much a couple lines at the end that say more information will come as we know it. Meaning we don't have all the answers, but here's what we do know. And, getting back to that crisis communications playbook, that is something tried and true. People want to just be acknowledged, that their concerns, their questions, are seen. And you can, really say at the end of the day, like, look, we don't have all the answers, but you'll be the first to know when we have them. And to be honest, when you don't know, you don't have the keenest understanding of perhaps someone else's life experience, then take that as an opportunity to say so. And internally, we've been doing in light of George Floyd and the ongoing protests, we've done a lot of soul searching internally where we have our diversity and inclusion council. The participation is exploding, and we have really been hands off in the way that we facilitate employee conversations. We don't want that to be led by the corporate communications team. We want that to happen in a very organic way as employees feel comfortable. That mostly is on Slack, a tool that we utilize very often. But it's that empathy of, hey, everybody's going through something you don't necessarily know. And Healthgrades is a company that cares a lot about its people. This has kind of proven out also where, our CEO has given folks additional wellness days. Just because, in addition to the pressures at work, then there's just the global, the pressures all around you every day. So it was very important for him to remind folks and to give them additional days just to, maintain your mental health and practice self-care.
So that's a great segue into our fifth pillar, put your purpose into practice. Before I go any further, I just want to mention that all of these pillars work hand in hand. You can't have one without having the other. You can't talk to an audience if you don't know who they are, but you can't effectively reach them without being empathetic, without being transparent, and coming off authentic. I think we saw this with a lot of companies, Amazon being one example that we showed, CrossFit, the CrossFit HQ is another example. And I'd be happy to talk about that one at length if you do not know what happened with them. However, the idea here is that companies now have a bigger responsibility. Instead of just sending a tweet, instead of just writing some words, you have to put that purpose into practice. We saw it with the Fast Company article earlier. Actions speak louder than words. People are demanding that companies are responsible and that are aware of what's going on. It's no longer good enough to just kind of keep heads down, whether you're CEO, whether you're communications professional, or anything in between. I think the silver lining here is that companies are, even if they didn't put out a statement around the national protests or, the new civil rights movement or even coronavirus, I think it's forcing companies to have these conversations with their leadership teams, with their communication teams, with, if it's a smaller company, with your whole company. And that's what's going to drive change and also drive your communications message. So knowing your purpose, knowing your audience, being transparent, being authentic, understanding your leadership, or if you are that leader, understanding where all of this comes into play will in turn then kind of change the game, if you will, for your communication strategy, because you will be able to put that purpose, put those words into action. Like Julia said, at Healthgrades, we've done a lot of conversations. Some of them are certainly not easy, especially from a communications perspective of, when do we get into the conversation? When do we not? Where's our lane? Where do we stay? Where do we go? Where do we, look to move forward in this new normal? And I think, at the end of the day, we realize, yes, we're a healthcare company. We have a say in the coronavirus pandemic and keeping our consumers, our clients, our hospitals safe and supported during this time. And I think that's something that, sparked a lot of conversations, and we're still talking about it. And we are certainly still trying to figure it out. So with that being said, the actual good news here. There is good news, I promise.
And that 2020 is almost over.
So to end, which is crazy because I'm sitting in Colorado. I know Julia is currently traveling. We're doing this from a distance. We're doing this virtually. And if you can tell, there's snow behind me, thanks to our lovely Denver September snowstorm. We're almost there. So we're not totally lost. We're going to learn. We're going to change. We have to evolve. That's the changing nature of our industry, but we're almost there, and we do see a light at the end of the tunnel. So embarrassing moment that
All right, guys, thank you so much. Have a great, great day, and we'll see you at other DSW sessions.
your question.